Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wasallam ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam ajma'een. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the compassionate, the merciful. We ask that He send His peace and blessings upon our noble and our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. We ask that He meld our intentions with the intentions of our pious predecessors, particularly with the intentions of the compiler of this text and his teacher and Imam Suyuti, and obviously with the intentions of our noble and our beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Okay, alhamdulillah. So we're going to try to make up a little bit of time. So we're going to go a little quick, and then we'll try to also maybe cut it a little short so that we can keep you all on the time that we promised you. And we find ourselves in the third session of this text, Mukhtar al-Hadith al-Sharif, of Mukhtar min al-Hadith al-Sharif, selections of the noble hadith, that we told you was a compilation of about 59 ahadith from a text before it of his teacher, Habib Muhammad, and that was about 360 hadith. It's all from a compilation or a short summary, selection from Jami' al-Suyuti, right? From a hadith text of Imam Suyuti. And we're on number 4, and every day we're basically taking a little bit about hadith science, lexicology, etc. Because it's just hard to talk about hadith if people don't know simple terms. Not because we want to really go into that terminology, because that would be another type of class. But if you don't know a little bit, it's very difficult. I might use words that I assume you know that you don't know, right? So today we find ourselves talking about different types of ahadith from the vantage point of how do they relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. So if you were in our Aqidah class, which not all of you were, we talked about what is Qur'an. Right? What is Qur'an? And now we're going to talk about what does it relate to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So with the usuliyun, with the legal theorists, they define it as the miraculous speech that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad and was written in the Mus'haf and was narrated to us by tawatur, which we'll talk about later, which means narrated in so many different ways, impossible, people got together and made it up. And one worships through its recitation. So its recitation is worship. And then Ahl Sunnah, meaning the theologians in general of Ahl Sunnah, they say it means two different things. The personal, meaning personal when you speak to yourself, we call that personal speech. Sometimes they call it internal. The internal, pre-eternal speech of Allah in His essence, neither through letter or sound. And they also call Qur'an the pronunciation that we know. So if somebody got here and recited the Fatiha, we say that's Qur'an. The first being not created, and it's not temporal, it's not in time. And the second is created and temporal. However, it's prohibited to say that the Qur'an is created. You're not allowed to say that, right? It's forbidden, it's out of adab. And also the Sahaba didn't talk about it like that. So we're just following in their footsteps anyway. Okay. So why is that important in relation to what we're talking about? Well, because hadith itself and the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and these types of things are important to differentiate between one another. And in terms of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, the scholars, including here Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, who's a famous Shafi'i scholar, also commented on hadith, but it's not Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, which is another scholar, okay? So it's confusing because they're both named Ibn Hajar, but it's two different scholars. He split up the speech that goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in 3 different categories. And he said the first and the most noble is the Qur'an. And it's first because it's different in a lot of different ways, some of which is that it's miraculous and it remained that way all throughout time. It's protected from change and substitution. And it's prohibited to touch the Mus'haf when you're in a state, except in a state of highest ritual purity. And you're not allowed to recite it if you're in a state of janaba. And because Allah ordered us to recite it in salah. And every letter of it is worth 10 hasanats when you recite it. So these are like reasons why it's of this lofty status. Okay. Then the next level, or excuse me, not the next level, but in that level of highness, but we don't have it around us with us, is the other texts, right? Other than the Quran, like what? The Torah, the Injil, etc. Okay, so that's category number 1, Ibn Hajar said. The category number 2 that is category number 2, right? Category number 3 is what's called a Hadith Qudsiyya. A Hadith Qudsiyya. And these, there's going to be here, this is the point that I really wanted to convey to you from this, which what is a Hadith Qudsi? We're going to talk about right now, and that was the point of everything we just did. It's just to cover this term. So, tawatur, again, like we told you, it's when we get it revealed to us from multiple different chains. So many chains that it's impossible that those people got together and cahooted basically to make it up. A Hadith Qudsi, it's from Allah, but we might have just gotten it from one chain, right? And it wasn't said to us that it's Quran, right? But it goes back all the way to the Prophet ﷺ saying something like, Allah said this. So then the main thing that I wanted to tell you about that is that there is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars. Some say that it is the speech of Allah, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the words that the Prophet ﷺ is giving to us. And some say, no, the Prophet ﷺ is using his words to speak about the meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him.
Would you repeat that?
Sure. Some say, and the position of this scholar, Shaykh Abdullah Siraj ad-Din, who wrote the famous work, Our Master Muhammad, Sayyidina Muhammad Rasulullah, one of the last great hadith scholars of Syria, is that a Hadith Qudsi is given to the Prophet ﷺ not just in meaning, but in word. Meaning, he's saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said the following, and Allah chose the words of Arabic that he pronounced, right? But it's not Quran. And another opinion of the scholars is that no, it was meanings that were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, then he used his own words to speak them, right? Of course, the Quran, by consensus, nobody disagrees, is words selected by Allah in that order to be recited in that way. There's no difference of opinion about Quran, right? This is about Hadith Qudsi, okay? So that's good to know, my friends, and it's important because certain hadith you're going to get, it's a hadith Qudsi, and certain hadith are normal hadith, which we'll see as we go forward. And then another word that I wanted you to know is al-muhaddith. We're going to say muhaddith a lot, or muhaddithun. And this is a scholar that knows the chain of the hadith and the name of the narrators and the content of the hadith, the matan. That's who a muhaddith is. As opposed to someone, or including, or maybe in comparison to someone who's a hafidh. A hafidh, we talked about that a little bit last week. And this is a synonym for muhaddith with some of the older generation. But some of them said, no, he's a person who's memorized so many ahadith, and he's really done so excellently in its different types. Riwayah and dirayah. And knowing the details around them. Right? And then a certain scholar named Al-Manawi, well known, of Ahl al-Hadith, he said there are 3 levels. The first level is the student, and he's the beginner. The second level is a muhaddith, and he's the one who focuses on its riwayah and its dirayah. And then there's another level, it's called hafidh, and he's the one who's memorized at least 100,000 hadith in their matan and in their chain. and he knows what he needs to know in relation to them. Then the hujjah is another level. And he's the one who knows 300,000 hadith in their chains. And then the last level, he said, is al-hakim. And that's the one whose knowledge encompasses all of the known transmitted hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of their matan and their chain and their isnad. Jarhan wa ta'alinan wa tarikhan. And a last group that some of them mention is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Right? Amir al-Mu'mineen is a laqab, it's like a nickname that's given to some of them. And Al-Hafidh al-Suyuti say that a group of them were called Amir al-Mu'mineen. From them, Sufyan al-Thawri, Ibn Rahwayhi, al-Bukhari, and others. And you might think that that name maybe came from the hadith that we shared with you at the beginning, that the Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on my khalifas, right? The people who memorized the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Great. That's all I wanted to cover with you for in terms of hadith terminology. That's important. Again, the only reason we're doing it is because it's very difficult to use these words if you don't know them. They're simple terms to keep in mind. At least they're a brief understanding of what they are. So we're at hadith number 4. Hadith number 4. And all of you should have the text. If you don't have the text, it's actually one of those envelopes. It's in there. So maybe actually some of the young folk might not have been here when we gave them out. Or if you don't have it, we can give it to you. Also, Sheikh Abdul Karim told me, and I just keep forgetting, that if you want to donate on behalf of the printing of the text, that's up to you. We're saying suggested price is $5. You don't have to donate anything. And it will go for more than just the text, just so you know. So you're not only donating, it's not $5 to print this. But in general, for all of the texts, the suggested amount is 5. I keep forgetting, and I just remembered, so I wanted to say it. Hadith 4, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أحب البلاد إلى الله مساجدها وأبغض البلاد إلى الله أسواقها رواه مسلم. So Imam Muslim, the one that we talked about last week, he's the one who narrated this hadith, right? It's in his compilation of Sahih, and so you'll find it there. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, the most beloved of places to God are mosques, masajid, plural of mosque. And the most abhorrent of places to God are the marketplaces. So the Messenger of Allah ﷺ here is teaching us that the most beloved places to God, the exalted, are the mosques because they are the houses of worship, the fountains from which taqwa pours forth, and the focal points where divine mercy descends. On the other hand, the most abhorrent places to God, mighty and majestic is He, are the marketplaces because they are places of heedlessness, deceit, and greed. Generally, right? Obviously, there are certain mosques, God forbid, that have been built with bad intentions, like Masjid Dirar at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that you'll cover in his seerah, that they had torn down, right? And not all marketplaces are bad places. The marketplaces of the Muslims, of the Prophet ﷺ, one of the first things he set up was a marketplace in Medina, right? And Sayyidina Umar said, we don't let anyone enter into our marketplace unless they know the rulings, right, regarding that. So not all marketplaces are bad, because a lot of people might misunderstand and say, oh my God, I work in a mall, or I work at a market, or I'm a businessman. Does that mean I'm always around the worst places? No, that's not what that means. But certain attributes of those places are really bad, right? Like one of our teachers used to say that until very recently, in a place like Tarim, they wouldn't let children of noble people enter into the market. And that they, like for example, descendants of the Prophet ﷺ or scholars, there was like a known designated place that they would go and they would stop, and like maybe their mother or somebody sent them to buy something. So somebody would see them, come up to them and be like, what can I purchase for you? And then they would go and purchase it for them and give it back to them, right? Because, a child might not be able to differentiate what's right and what's wrong. And also their heart might become attached to things that are in the market that they can't buy, which is bad for their upbringing and their rearing, right? So this hadith encourages Muslims to love mosques and be connected to them. And most of you know the well-known hadith of the 7 who have the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day when there's no shade except His, the people whose hearts are attached to the mosques, right? It's not just they're physically always at the mosque, right, for the 5 prayers or outside of it, but that they, Allahumma salli wa sallim alayhi wa ala alihi, that their heart is constantly attached. That means they love being there, right? And that's, an encouragement for us to make mosques places where people want to be, right? And I think a lot of times in this conversation, people take extremes, in my opinion. Like, there are people who blame everything on the mosques and the people who run the mosques. And then there are other people who blame completely the people who don't come, right? And I think it's pretty clear that there's fault on all sides. People should want to go to mosques regardless of how people treat them. But also, people should be treating people well in mosques. So, both of those things are true statements. Understandably, the people at the mosques, I think, carry more responsibility, right, to represent the message of the Prophet ﷺ better. And I remember with Sheikh Abdul Karim, when he first came back, a year or two into being here, we would discuss a lot, how mosques are. And I know other mashayikh tell me, like, even people who are learned have a really tough time in mosques. People are constantly criticizing them, so it's not something that's made up. There are people, unfortunately, who've taken the mosques as their own personal country club of sorts, right? Where if things don't run their way, then they'll give everyone else a hard time. And it's not necessarily from a sectarian perspective. It's even just from like older folk who don't want kids there doing certain things or what have you. And I personally know somebody who's pretty close to me who hadn't been to a mosque in a really long time. And they went with a friend of theirs to the mosque who's also Muslim. And they were carrying like coffee with them. So this person who's close to me, is related to me, said, maybe we should put the coffee down because we're going to go in the mosque. The other person's like, so what? It's like, I'm just drinking a coffee. It's not a big deal. And they walked into the mosque and like immediately, like the aunties kind of went off on them really, really strongly. And this other young lady who hadn't been to a mosque in a long time, she's like, I'm never coming back. And so we have a place, like in terms of da'wah, in terms of calling people to Islam, both Muslim and not, to make mosques not like that, right? And to know how to speak with people gently. And there are many, many, proofs of this from the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't read the Prophet ﷺ's story, and we don't really know who they're representing. So another lesson to learn is also discourage from unnecessarily frequenting marketplaces, because they're the most hated places in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on high, right? So constantly like window shopping, and that's bad for you on so many levels, right? It's bad for you because you're going to buy stuff that you don't need, but it's also bad because your heart becomes attached to those things, right? So actually yesterday this was brought up, Brad was with us at the intimate halaqah with Sheikh Abdul Karim over there in Troy. And so, to constantly let your eye, as Sheikh Abdul Karim has mentioned to you all numerous times, that has been created for the worship of Allah, the beatific vision, to gaze upon Quran, to gaze upon what's beloved, to use that to gaze upon, gathering wealth and these types of things and ownership is bad for you and I, right? Because generally one's heart, mind, and senses become overwhelmed with that which is advertised, causing one to become forgetful of Allah and the next life. And this is the reason why marketplaces are detested by Him. Great and glorious is He, right? And again, as has been taught to you all numerous times, the senses are like doors to the heart. So if we're flooding our heart with these images, those images are really hard to remove, right? So, an image of a thing that you don't have, that you don't need. You don't have it, we don't have it, and we don't need it, right? And yesterday, Sheikh Abdul Karim mentioned the story of the Prophet ﷺ walking in front of a camel that was pregnant, and that was the most beloved thing and most valuable thing to the Arabs because generally their wealth was in camels, and this was about to double its investment. And so the Prophet ﷺ turned away from it, and he said, why are you turning away from that which is most valuable to us? So the Prophet ﷺ, that was the Prophet ﷺ's way, right? Is to not gaze upon that which we don't need, and we shouldn't be gazing upon and coveting that which we don't have. A certain level of indifference to those things. A third point to learn from the hadith is to note that all interactions at marketplaces are hated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if heedlessness is taking place, and if the law is not being followed, right? So we're not talking about necessities or what's permissible. We're talking about what's beyond that, right? And it's important not to take that to the extreme, right? And then some of you who were in the Glorious Treasure class learned a dua for the marketplace. So I'll read the hadith first. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu relates that the envoy of the Prophet ﷺ, the envoy of Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever enters a marketplace and says, there is no God but Allah, alone without partners, to him belongs all dominion and praise. He gives life and he causes death, and he is living and never dies. Good is in his hands, and he has power over all things. Allah will write thousands upon thousands of good deeds in his favor, and he will erase thousands upon thousands of misdeeds, and he will erase thousands upon thousands of degrees. And we can send you this if you don't have it. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. There is no God but Allah, alone without partners. Sovereignty is his, and to him belongs all praise. He gives life and he causes death, and he is living and never dies. All good lies in his hands, and he has power over all things. Right? And this is Tirmidhi narrates this. So, and you'll find this constantly, that the Prophet ﷺ taught us like ad'iyah, du'as, litanies, to protect us from harm. And you know, there's a meaning of just always being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what we do, what we buy, what we sell. And one of the shuyukh, when we were recently at a conference of du'at, he said something that was really profound to me and I think powerful. He said one of the problems of our time is that we've disassociated religion from everything outside of what's blatantly devotional, right? And so we tell people basically that Islamic sciences are these and everything else has nothing to do with it. And he said what's happened is there's a vacuum. So in everything else, medicine, law, business, pharmacy, whatever, you name it, politics, everything, there's a vacuum, right? When in reality, almost all of those jobs are fard kifaya. So they're a communal obligation, right? Somebody's got to be the doctor. Somebody has to be the pharmacist. Somebody's got to do it. So it's an obligation on the whole community to have somebody to do it. And not only that, those things tie back to the Sharia. So there are maximums and minimums that those people have to follow. And then beyond just the law, there's a sunnah of how the Prophet ﷺ taught some of those things. And beyond that, there's wisdom of the scholars in our past and present relating to those things. And then there's dua that are associated with those things, either from the sunnah or things that the scholars have put together, right? And so this sheikh was talking about how, like in agriculture, farmers, for long periods of time, they would be taught ad'iyah to say when they're planting and when they're harvesting and these types of things. So they were always attached to the Sharia and to the Sunnah, and then they loved the scholars and they loved the awliya and they loved the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So you had a very functioning, healthy society. But when there's a vacuum, it's really dangerous, right? And this sheikh particularly was saying, he was encouraging the du'at to say you have to communicate these principles to people, right? Because otherwise, those people, not out of their own evil or anything, they have nothing to attach themselves to, so they attach to what? Other ideologies, right? Ideologies that are not necessarily evil in and of themselves, but they're not ideologies of the Prophet ﷺ. So you have people who are Marxists, and you have people who are this, and people who are that, and people who are that, because the relevancy of the message doesn't attach itself to their professions and their careers, right? So this is a big thing in our religion. And one of the other things I want to narrate is I was watching on one of the websites of the mashayikh that they had business workshops. And it was so amazing. They would go to a mosque, and this place has a lot of entrepreneurs and stuff, and they would just do workshops with them where there would be a conversation between the entrepreneurs and the shaykh about, okay, well, you guys have this type of sale that you do, and this is what the ulama say about this, and then they would be like, okay, well, what about in this type of scenario? So there was a connection between the scholars and the businessmen. And I think it was Sheikh Abdul Karim, and I'm sorry if it's not. I think he told me for years, no one would ask him anything about transactions. People would just ask about devotion, except Usama Khanna. He was the only person that would call him and be like, okay, We have this type of training. Like, how do we deal with that? Meaning people had totally forgot that the Sharia had anything to do with other than devotion, right? And it has a lot to do with marriage, it has to do with transactions, it has to do with these types of things. So that's another thing that I think we learn from this hadith. But also we learn, if you're not aware of, that not all places are the same. Not all times are the same. And that's a bizarre, concoction of our era amongst Muslims, that there's sacredness has totally been wiped out, right? Not all places are the same. They aren't. Mecca and Ann Arbor are not the same. That's not to say that Ann Arbor doesn't have some amount of positiveness and hopefully holiness attributed to it, but it's not Mecca, right? And it's definitely not the ground in which the Prophet ﷺ is buried. There's some ikhtilaf about what's better, Mecca or Medina. The Kaaba, they say, is the best of places, except for the place where the Prophet ﷺ, the dirt in which he's buried, right? So the masajid are the most beloved to Allah. And we don't mean, forgive me for being a little bit, aggressive about this, but, we're not talking about, non-profit X or non-profit Y and board X and board Y. We're talking about places that have been endowed for Allah, right? To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they belong to Allah. They don't belong to the board. They don't belong to the founders. They belong to Allah. Now, they might have some type of legal setup, even in the Sharia, where certain people are responsible for the upkeep of the masjid, but the whole point of a masjid is it belongs to Allah, right? And it belongs to the Muslims, right? And then times, obviously, Friday is better than any average other day. Ramadan is better than other times of the year, the holy months, the sacred months, etc. So the masajid should be respected. One last thing that I'll say about that before we move to the next hadith, because we don't have a lot of time, is we listened to a lecture by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad that I personally found really profound. It was at RIS about 3-4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And it was at 9 a.m., so nobody came. There was 15 people, 20 people or something. And it was the first lecture. And he does a lot of times the first lectures. I'm not sure if he just likes that time period. And it was about mosques. That's actually why I went. I was working at MCWS at the time. And, he really laid into, in the UK, they have this thing, I guess. I've never, been outside of Heathrow, so I don't know. But he said that there's this problem where people will build mosques right next to each other in competition, not for reward, which is great. Like if we're building mosques in competition for reward, but out of sectarianism. So they'll use certain insignia and emblems in their mosque that know the other group won't come. And so they'll build mosques right next to each other, competing, right? And be I don't go to that mosque, I'm going to this. Not in a place like Syria where there's thousands and thousands of mosques right next to each other, you'll find them. But that's just because people want to give. It's not like they're competing. They're just I want, a palace in heaven, I'll build a mosque, right? No, this is out of competition for resources and out of competition for sectarianism, etc. So he was saying, and I really, subhanAllah, I think it's real powerful, that mosques aren't meant for your ideology and they're not meant for your sectarian thoughts and they're not meant for your cultural baggage. They're meant for worship of Allah. Now, if you want to create a different institute that, promotes your thought process, fine, but not a mosque, right? And I thought that was a really powerful thing for people like you and I to be aware of both mosques that we might frequent or mosques where we might sit on a board or we might serve or a mosque we might build, right? Inshallah. And that we make it as a place for people to worship Allah, not a place for people to attack one another and to promote this or to promote that. We promote the religion of the Prophet ﷺ. And aslan, we don't call to sect. And we don't call to madhab. We don't call to tariqah. We call to Allah and the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Okay. Let's do the next hadith and then we'll take questions. We're supposed to end at 3:15. We hopefully will try. If not, we'll go 5 minutes over. Okay. Hadith 5. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أحب الله لما يغدوكم به من نعمه وأحبوني لحب الله وأحب أهل بيتي لحبي رواه الترمذي. The Messenger of Allah عليه الصلاة والسلام said, love God for His blessings And that's Sidi Amzat's translation. You might say, okay, no, he has it there. By which he nourishes you. That's good. Alhamdulillah. And love me for God's love of me, and love my folk for my love. This is narrated by Tirmidhi. And here you took a little bit about what folk, family of the Prophet ﷺ, means, and it means different things in different disciplines. And that's something that's difficult sometimes for us who grew up in like Western educational systems. We think of things a lot of times in black and whites. No, it means different things in different disciplines. So in the Arabic, the family of the Prophet ﷺ are known as the Ahl al-Bayt. They are also known as the people of the cloak. And you took that it might mean the descendants of Abd al-Muttalib, right? And Hashim that are believers. And you took that sometimes they'll say the family of the Prophet ﷺ means, when we say Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala ali, all of the believers. But here they're talking about literally the descendants of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, right? His Ahl al-Bayt, right? So he says in the Hadith, love Allah for the blessings by which He nourishes you, you and I. And the Quran says, وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. You don't have anything of blessings except that it's from Allah. Right? It all stems from Allah. And Ghazali says that people love for 3 different reasons. Love comes back to 3 different causes. The first is that they benefit from their beloved. And here, there's some wisdom in here that the Prophet ﷺ says, at the very least, love Allah because of what you benefit from. And the Prophet ﷺ said that hearts are disposed to love those who do good for them. And that's important in da'wah, to know that, right? So like one form of da'wah is just feeding people and caring for them, right? And one of the intentions is you do it because Allah commanded you to. And another thing is it's intelligent in da'wah because if you want to have a positive effect on people, you have to do good for them, right? So some people who have like a negative enmity towards people of religion, one way to deal with it is to give them a lot of gifts and take them out. So like we used to a lot take out folk to like, burger spots when they're kids, because at least they'll start associating faith with good times, right? As opposed to just people yelling at them, right? And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, really everything we have is from who? Is from Him, everything. So at the very least we should love Him because everything we've got is from Him. The second reason Imam Ghazali says is because of a beauty inherent in them, right? So you might love someone because they have physical beauty or they have certain personality traits that are beautiful, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Him belongs the beautiful names and attributes. Beauty itself is created by Him. So if we see like the most beautiful, like sometimes we'll come here at Fajr and it'll be just like beautiful outside, right? Well, that's created by Allah. So it's an indication of the creator of these beautiful things, His beauty is beyond even our fathoming. And then the third thing Ghazali says is perfection in attributes. And we just took, for those of you in the Risala class, those took Aqidah, that Allah belongs to Him all attributes of perfection. And we disavow, that belongs to Him any attributes of imperfection. So really, He's the one who's most deserving of our love. Right? So the hadith shows us that believers should, first and foremost, love God the Exalted for the many blessings He bestows upon His creation, both materially and spiritually. Your Islam, my Islam, the Prophet ﷺ, these are all gifts from Allah. He, blessed and exalted is He, gives material blessings like food, drink, as well as spiritual blessings such as guidance and noble character. Right? In addition, if a Muslim truly loves God, then they will, by extension, love his Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ told us that he is the beloved of Allah, وَلَا فَخْرٍ, and that's not boasting. That's his station. Right? He found the Sahaba talking about the different prophets and their attributes and their places and their nicknames, and he told them, that's all true, and I am the beloved of Allah, and that's not boasting. Like, in other words, I'm telling you that as a command from Allah for me to convey it to you. Right? So, if for no other reason, you should love Him because Allah loves Him. Right? Let alone that you should love Him because we benefit from Him, We should love him because he's beautiful in so many different ways. You should love him because of his perfect character traits, right? But at the very least, you should love him because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves him. Consequently, if one loves the Prophet, then they will love the Prophet's kin, his family, because he loves them. So the Prophet commands to love Allah, the messengers, and his family. And each of them is related to one another. Right? And they're all related to one another. And this is really problematic for the people who try to decrease love of the Prophet or decrease people's love of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Because they're all related to one another, right? So if you're decreasing or you're trying to decrease or challenge people's love of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, it's like you're taking away from the rank of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And if you're trying to take away from love of the Prophet, it's like you're taking away from love of Allah, right? So love of them is the most important thing. And I don't have any children, but the people that I know that are people of piety, they say the number one thing you should be teaching your kids is love of Allah and love of the Prophet ﷺ, if nothing else first. Because if you teach them a lot of rules without love, then it'll just harm them. And I'm sure mothers and fathers in this room could be better speak to that than myself. So some of the lessons that we learn from this hadith as we wrap up. Hadith teaches us the obligation of loving Allah and its precedence above all other loves. Right? We should love Allah above everything. And we were reading yesterday morning with Sheikh Abdul Karim and Mushir the expression of this in one of the texts of the Mashayikh, saying that means that you should put their requests above your own. Which is really, if you think about it, really hard. But we should be doing that. That means nothing should come before what they've requested, what they've commanded, what they've prohibited. That means if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to do something, if we had true love of Him, He would not miss us where He's commanded us to be, and He would find us everywhere that He's commanded us to be. And He would not find us where He's prohibited for us to be. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ says, you do not truly believe until you have that type of love. His creation is in complete debt to Him. He is the self-subsistent, al-ghani. And we're the fuqara. We're the poor slaves. Meaning we're always in need. Always. And He's not in need of anyone. And no one is more worthy of adoration and dedication to except Allah. It also teaches us the obligation of showing goodness towards the Prophet ﷺ because he is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Habib. And he's al-Mustafa. And he's al-Mujtaba. And he's Khatim al-Anbiya. And one of our teachers told us something that I always view as profound, that these names that you were just learning from Sheikh Abdul Karim, and there are other names, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who chose those names for him. And if you really ask, well, he's Muhammad, the praised one, or the one who's constantly being praised, but who's the praiser? Who's the doer? Who's the active participle? Right? And although it's other people as well, really it's the Allah. He's the one who's praising the Prophet ﷺ. In the Quran, it's filled with praise of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he's Al-Mustafa, the chosen one. Who chose him? Allah. He's Al-Mujtaba. He's the elect. Who elected him? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So our love of him and his rank is all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why it doesn't make sense when people say don't send too much durood, don't send too much salawat. You're actually saying Allah send peace and blessings on the Prophet. And it's the miracles of the Prophet that nobody in the history of Islam has said that the Prophet is divine in any way, shape, or form. It's a core teaching of Islam. Some of the heretics who left Islam actually said that Ali karamallahu wajha was divine. Right? No one's ever said that about the Prophet ﷺ. It's amazing. It's a miracle. Right? the messenger spent his life struggling to spread the message so that all morally accountable creatures could know and submit to the one who created them. He said that none of you sacrificed for this religion as much as I did. None of us did. As tough as our life might be in the da'wah or what have you, none of us gave what the Prophet ﷺ gave. No prophet or messenger cared for and sacrificed more for his community, as did the Prophet ﷺ. Since that is the case, is there any other created being more deserving of one's love? No. He said, my life and my death are good for you. They said, oh, Messenger of Allah, your life we understand, but how's your death good for us? He said, when I pass to the next life, if you do good, I thank Allah for you. And if you do bad, I ask Allah to forgive you. And He's the intercessor and to no end. Alayhi salatu wasalam. This gathering that we're in, we hope, is something that the Prophet ﷺ, it stretches back to that day, right? And those days and that teaching. Not non-prophet X or non-prophet Y. And then lastly, the hadith shows the obligation of loving the Prophet's family because he loves them. I think we mentioned it to you. If not, we do now. That he said, I left for you two things that if you hold on to them, you will never be misguided. Right? And there's two versions. There's at least two versions of the hadith. One, he says, the book of Allah and my sunnah. And Shaykh Ali and others believe the second one's actually stronger in terms of its authenticity. The book of Allah and my family. Right? And what they say is they're intertwined. Right? Because the knowledgeable family of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sunnah, they're really the carriers of this message. Right? They're really the carriers of this message. God says in the Quran, commanding the Prophet to say to the believers, say, no reward do I ask of you for this except the love of those near of kin. Although some people may express extreme views in claiming their love for the Prophet ﷺ, one should nevertheless be aware of the importance of loving the Prophet ﷺ's family while avoiding extreme views, right? And, it's not like it's rampant that there's extreme views of love of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And a lot of times, this is again my opinion, please don't write it down as a note, but I think a lot of times the Muslim community is constantly trying to cure diseases that we don't have, right? And like they're always saying when we're talking about the masajid, every time we talk about the importance of masajid or worship, almost every single time that's happened, I've either seen somebody speaking or myself, there's constantly been somebody who says, brother, we have to be balanced, time for work, as though there are thousands of people sitting in mosques not doing anything. I'm kidding, I've never met anybody like that, ever. But I've met lots of other people who don't go into mosques, right? So why are we trying to cure a disease that doesn't exist, right? If we had that problem, then we should speak about that. Like Ghazali talks about, we have too many fuqaha and no doctors. And it's a fard kifaya. We really don't have that problem now, right? We don't have enough fuqaha, right? So there's nothing wrong with being a doctor. No, it's great and it's noble, right? If you're doing it for the right reason. Just like there's nothing wrong with being a faqih if you're doing it for the right reason. But we also have to be intelligent enough to see where the vacuum is, right? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad.